Great. So let me see if I can share my screen. Do I have sharing rights?
Yes, you do.
So can you see that?
Yes, we can, Kelly.
Okay, let's see. Woohoo! There we are. I always love it when it works right off the bat. Yay! Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak this morning to all of you. It's a really easy task for me because I love what I do, and I'm very clear on my purpose here in the world right now. And I find when I heard Marianne say that the theme that you've had this month is about purpose, I just started to smile because I have come into my purpose here in the world probably in the last 10 to 15 years. And it is in the area of social progress, social justice, and economic development. So I thought that was really very interesting when I heard that. This is my workplace. I'm not going to repeat everything that that Marianne has just said, but I work in the area of international development and cooperation. So that means that I work with countries that are not high-income countries, countries that are sort of middle income and in some cases fragile states. And I help them with social progress and economic development. I've partnered with the United Nations Population Fund, the World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the Commonwealth Secretariat, Global Affairs Canada, the Australia Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, the World Health Organization, and right now I'm working with the Swiss Development Corporation. But I've just returned to Canada a year ago from living and working for 4 years in Mauritius. And Mauritius is a little green X in the middle of the Indian Ocean, just between Africa and Australia. So every one of those X's represents a place I've lived and I've worked in the past 25 years. And all of my work is overseas, and I really quite love it. The achievements that I have, Marianne talked about being made a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, Manufacturers and Commerce. That happened in 2017. And to be frank, it doesn't really do much other than get me into some neat places like Marlborough House on the left and St. James Palace for dinner with Princess Anne on the right. That was some time ago, and you're not really supposed to take photographs in those environments. But I figure, 3 years later, who's going to notice? So that's kind of some of the stuff that I do and some of the places that I end up in the last several years. But joking aside, I like to describe myself as a global and social entrepreneur with a number of areas where I focus. I started my work in Canada in 21 years ago, working in international development and cooperation. And since that time, I've branched out to Mauritius, and I work with some partners with the government of Switzerland. And my most recent adventure is creating a foundation, which I'd like to talk to you about in a few minutes. So there's a whole bunch of components that make up the work that I do. And I've been asked many times how my work assists governments of smaller nations and whether models of governance from Ontario or Canada fit well. And the short answer is no, they don't. And the longer answer is, well, it depends. What I'd like to comment on right now, this is a photograph in Mauritius. This was taken from my office when I was working there. And every day I would see a rainbow. Mauritius was described by Mark Twain as the place that was upon which heaven was modeled when he first saw Mauritius. And I don't disagree with him in that regard. And rainbows are they're very common occurrence there. And what we say in Mauritius is that, I have to read my sign on my wall, the rainbow is a very powerful and important message that good and beautiful things often follow the darkest of storms. And a double rainbow is a symbol of transformation in your life The material world is represented by the first rainbow, while the second is the spiritual world. So we had lots of growth and development spiritually in Mauritius as well, because it's such a combination of many different cultures and faiths, and it was really quite profound. But coming back to my work, what I've learned living and working overseas and in advising small nation states is that they're not necessarily per se interested in how we do things in Canada, because the Canada context can be completely irrelevant to their unique circumstance. The one thing that I have found is that being Canadian gives me a lot of credibility when I work in Commonwealth countries, because we have there's a commonality in our systems of government and our system and our set of values and how we do things. But I think more importantly, my experience and my observation is that it's really important to tell people when you work with them overseas that they're not broken and you're not there to fix them. I think too many organizations and consultants take a view that they've shown up to, they know exactly what the country needs, and they don't listen to the views of the people there. And these are generally two very different things and can be a real deal breaker. So what I've learned is that you have to understand what motivates and speaks to a country. This takes time and it takes listening skills. And as an outsider, it's really important to establish your credibility to be accepted very quickly. Every country is unique, every situation is unique, and you have to approach your fact finding and information gathering with an open mind and an open heart, as they say in Mauritius. You also have to be really relentless in peeling back the layers so that you see what really exists as opposed to what people would like you to see at the level of the surface. And that way you understand what needs to be done and maybe what things you could bring to the table as a guide on the side. You also have to be very fearless in advocating for your projects. And this might mean going head to head with people who think that they know better than the country in which you're living and you're working. And that can be a bit of a challenge some days. So you have to put on your battle armor and make sure that you're listening very well to what people really need so that you can help them on their journey. These are some interesting pictures of places where I've been and where I've worked. And what I wanted to talk about here is that acceptance of change, especially change as it relates to progress and justice, is much easier at the national level if you can look at what already exists and link the pieces together. And if you can create a vision where people can see themselves and can see themselves in that vision, where they see their life needs being addressed, where the shoe pinches necessarily, you can have more traction and you can have more success. I've also learned that many times we want to focus on those big, bold results, those very big, splashy headlines, and we forget the small, inclusive gestures, particularly of dignity and respect. And those sometimes are more important and have a more profound impact on transformation and changing mindsets. And that is one of my passions, transformation and changing mindsets, but wrapping it up and treating people with dignity and respect. The picture on your upper right corner is the third oldest parliament in the Americas, and it's in Barbados. And it was built in 1639. And has been modified over time. The picture on the bottom right corner is the Knights Templar fortress in Malta. And on the left-hand side is the hospital that the Knights of the Hospitalier Knights founded in 1113 in Malta to help people and pilgrims on their road for their unique spiritual journey. And it's a really neat place to go for dinner. Now, these pictures were taken by my husband, Peter, when we were on safari in the Serengeti on the left and on the Masai Mara in Kenya on the right. And what I'd like to do is turn around the question, what about models from developing countries? Could they possibly fit into Canada or Ontario or any other developed world? I was speaking at a conference in Arusha, Tanzania in 2009 when the picture was taken on the left. Kenya, the government of Kenya had just rolled out something called M-Pesa, which was a mobile phone platform that was initially started so that people working in Nairobi could send money back to their village using a text message, which was free, rather than using Wells Fargo or some other kind of transfer service, because there weren't banks in villages to be able to receive those funds anyways. It was absolutely fantastic. One elder in each village received a cell phone. Families were able to transmit payments. They could have job interviews. You could even vote in local and state elections. Today, M-Pesa is on wildfire across Africa, and countries like Estonia, which is considered the digital leader in the world, are saying, wow, like that's really neat. Why didn't we think of that back in 2009? When I was there at this conference and hearing about this information, Canada, the UK, and Australia were all asked and approached by Kenya to see if we wanted to conduct a pilot project, and all three countries said no. And the attitude was, what could we possibly learn from a developing country? And it was really quite extraordinary, because when you look at some of the changes that have happened here in Kenya, the whole idea was, we can't afford to install landlines. We can't afford the telephone infrastructure to connect people the way they do in North America. Our country's too big, the terrain is too difficult, so it made way more sense to install a whole bunch of cell towers and give everybody a cell phone. And then they were connected. So it's very interesting. I think it's really basic. Every country, every First Nations community is looking for the same thing: to be high income, sustainable, innovative, have an inclusive economy, have modern infrastructure, have global connectivity, and have gender equality. Everyone wants to know that inherently they have value and they have a voice, regardless of their perspective, their community, or their background. They're all looking for social progress and social justice. And today in our world, challenges are becoming far more complex and interconnected, and change is happening at an unprecedented rate. Countries now need to adapt and be very agile and come up with flexible solutions. So what countries today are looking for, developing countries, the world in which I work, they're just looking for a level playing field. And I think this is why we're seeing so much disruption around the world right now. The Commonwealth typically has been where I have worked, and the Commonwealth is a group of 54 countries, 32 of which are small and developing states. Their combined gross national domestic product in 2020 was 13 trillion US dollars. And you can see they have a huge combined population of 2.4 billion people, and more than 60% of those are under 30. We have a fantastic opportunity to really help mold and shape young minds throughout the Commonwealth. I've been a technical expert for the Commonwealth Secretariat on 2 occasions. I lived and worked in St. Lucia in 2014 for universal health reform, and I lived and worked in Mauritius for 4 years, starting in 2016, for public sector transformation. And in both those instances, I worked in government. I was given a position there and a space to work and a team to work with. And it was that kind of support really makes a difference in how your projects can get traction and be very successful. And I think that that's an important model. But the Commonwealth is a very interesting group. And are very focused on governance and sort of domestic reform and blue ocean economy and climate change. You were just talking this morning about the geese and climate change. And this is a group with 32 nation states that are islands, especially the Maldives. You know, we're on track right now. The Maldives could be sinking by 2035. how the sea level is rising. Kiribati in the South Pacific, right now, very few people. I think their population is less than 25,000, but nonetheless, they are a nation, they are a government, they're a group of people. And the recommendation from the last United Nations mission to Kiribati is to close the country, that by 2030, the ocean will have overtaken the island, and it's just simpler to move people to somewhere else. How would you feel if that was you? These things are really, really quite extraordinary. So go somewhere else completely different, a desert country. This is Namibia. Namibia is in Africa. It's on the west coast, down by South Africa, and it's a desert country. It's where all kinds of different Star Wars was filmed there. For example, the desert scene in Star Wars. There were some of that. The dunes in Namibia are really quite extraordinary. And the United Nations is considered to be the midwife of Namibia, helping to give birth to Namibia 20 years ago through its separation from South Africa. And with the United Nations, people love it or they hate it. I find it can be a very controversial organization, but I have lived and worked in countries where the United Nations has lifted people out of poverty and have shown people a vision of hope and beauty, and has delivered on what it said it was going to do. And I think the UN has a really strong and significant role around the world. So this isn't, I'm not trying to advocate for the UN. I'm just saying sometimes we have to look at things through a different lens. We may have a view from where we sit here, but you have to look at things through a different lens and see how it really impacts people in another place and in another way. Now, this is my latest adventure. So last year, in the middle of COVID, I took the rash, some might say, unadvised decision to establish an innovation foundation in the Netherlands, because the work that I do has a lot of sort of corporate social responsibility attached to it. And I wanted to find a location where I could have an organization that could have a commercial purpose and raise money through consulting on social impact initiatives, and also be able to have competitions and awards and sort of like a foundation component to it. And the only place I could find in the world where legally those two things can live in one house is in the Netherlands. So I opened up a foundation in Rotterdam. And right now, the impetus behind this is a wicked problem on global sustainability. And global sustainability has been on the agenda for decades, and yet long-term change has been really difficult to achieve. And I think right now, particularly with COVID, we've been given a unique opportunity to do things differently, to reset and reimagine the global economy and make more substantial impacts towards more inclusive socioeconomic development. So the work that I'd like to do in this foundation is to look at how innovation and strategic resilience are critical building blocks to adapting and tackling challenges, and looking towards a new form of sustainable development that builds back greener and builds back better, using the Sustainable Development Goals as a guide. And I've got three sort of I don't want to call them competitions, but three areas of focus on the foundation side, through some impact awards, to look at investing in initiatives that reward innovation and make an impact. Because I really believe that some of the best ideas for solving some of the world's most critical problems can come from anyone, anywhere. They're all personal to me. I'll start with U-Model in the middle. In the 1880s in Canada, the Ministry of Agriculture and Arts awarded prizes for the best managed farm. And they awarded gold and silver and bronze prizes for innovative practices. And innovative practices were identified, they were brought to Parliament, and they were then incorporated as standards in the Ministry of Agriculture's guidelines. So they were brought to Parliament, and they were enacted through legislation. And the farm I grew up on won a gold and silver award for the best managed farm in the 1880s. And so it earned the right to be called a model farm, and it's still called a model farm today. And so that's the impetus behind uModel, which is going to explore innovative practices in circular agriculture and community development, working with young people, modeling and adapting ideas that work. The one on the bottom is called U17, and that's bringing the 17 Sustainable Development Goals to youth who are aged 5 to 17, because children are the spark and the seedlings and the catalysts for change and sustainability leadership. So this project is going to look at a U17 competition to design a learning experience where the Sustainable Development Goals can be brought to kids so that they reimagine their communities, they choose to change, they believe in their future, and they do the right thing, making their own impact responsibly. So we want them to discover the possibilities and responsibilities we have for a more sustainable planet. The one on the top, it's a competition to look at leading practices and innovative ideas to integrate social and economic growth with an acceleration to a green future. Because when you think of it sometimes around green sustainability, it's at the local level where you can see the most impact. And so in greener, the R stands for many things like rethink, reimagine, renew, regenerate, rehabilitate, reintroduce, recover, repair, restore, and results. And for us, a greener person has courage and resiliency, and with very little else, can make a big impact. My husband was a greener person, so this is a bit tough. So this is a memory of him. He worked for 35 years in Ontario parks and created green spaces up in the Thunder Bay area that would never have existed if he hadn't had the impetus to work in partnership with the private sector to reduce logging and increase partnerships with First Nations people. So he had an interesting career. So that's greener. Now, here, for something completely different. When I look at today and where the world is going, I think we're all transitioning to a new normal where we need to look at the world through a very different lens. The picture on the left is a boat in Malta, and the eye, that's the evil eye, to ward off the evil eye, and that comes from the Greeks. And boats in Malta have looked like that for thousands of years. The picture on the right is taken in Barbados at an old fort that's been turned into a hotel. And it's sort of a picture through a picture to look at the world in a different way. And I think those who see opportunities and adapt more quickly will be more sustainable and resilient in the longer term. Globally, we're at a turning point. And there's an opportunity to rethink a more inclusive socioeconomic development. And this is where I think the work that I do fits a space for brilliant ideas and solutions to complex problems. And this is what I call positive, inclusive disruption, or my version of organized chaos. There's a lovely quote, not all those who wander are lost. And this is taken in Namibia. This is one of 2 places in the world where the desert meets the sea, and the other place is in Morocco. And I was there last October, in February and in October. And I may wander the world for my work and my passion and my purpose, but I am never lost. I know why I get up each day. I know the work that I'm doing, and this is why I love my job. So I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this morning. I apologize for my a little bit being emotional, but that's life, and life moves on, and we step ahead and we move forward. So thank you very much. And I can stop sharing my screen because I'm not sure you want to, continue looking at me on a dune in Namibia. How about I do that?
Well, thank